Let's get started here. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Just getting organized. Here we go. Live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Instagram. All systems go. As you can see, I'm traveling. I'm in a weird hotel room in Edmonton, Alberta, way up north, working on some client matters today. So that's exciting. And I don't have a good setup, so I have to turn my head to read my notes, but whatever. Welcome to Mornings with Scott, the best damn business show for medium and small businesses on the planet. It is October 17, 2024, episode 290. Let's get started, shall we? Just let me check my Instagram. Yes, we are good there. I know what you want me to talk about right off the bat. You're going to say, Scott, talk about that Kamala Harris interview with Brett Baer yesterday. No, we're not going to talk about that. There were no leadership. Listen, we talk about politics on this business show because we try to talk about current events, and we're in an election season. And the current events, what we talk about, we try to draw leadership issues. How is it going to impact leadership lessons? That's the right word. How do we learn how to run our business better? What things are going to impact our business? How do we invest better, run our life, get better financial health, all that sort of stuff from current events. And if it's political season, well, politics is a good way to do that. But there were no lessons from that interview last night. But I do have a hot take for you. Remember when she had the debate with Biden? When the debate with Trump, and coming into the debate, everybody said, "Oh, Kamala Harris is going to be a disaster. Things are going to go terrible." And I said, "Nah, she's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. She's going to be fine." And then they had the debate, and everybody sort of thought, "Hey, Kamala maybe won." At least that was the initial reaction, and the polls didn't show it afterwards. But she did fine. Here's my hot take on the interview with Brett Baer last night. She did fine. She did absolutely fine. Every commentator, left and right, is saying it was an unmitigated disaster. I don't see that. I don't see it. She went in there with a mission, and her mission was not to answer questions of Brett Baer. Her mission was to just get on that side of the spectrum in terms of a newscast and to bash Trump. And she was very successful at doing that, I thought, with just nonsense. I don't know that she's capable to answer a real question. I don't know that she's capable to talk about her policy, but it doesn't matter. I think that's already baked in. I think that's baked into the whole analysis and the polling already. What she did was she got in front of some independents and she was, and maybe those not never Trump right-leaning people, and she got in front of them where she's not able to do that on other platforms like CNN or MSNBC or whatever, and she bashed Trump. So I think that's what she wanted to do, and she got it done. So good for her. Wall Street Journal reports Phillips 66 will close a refinery near Los Angeles in the fourth quarter of 2025, citing its long-term sustainability, and by that they mean unsustainability and market dynamics. Their CEO of the Houston-based oil refiner on Wednesday. So this is a big refinery they've announced they're closing down next year. The company is working with land development firms, it doesn't matter what names they are, to evaluate future use of the sites, which encompass 650 acres in Wilmington, California, and Carson, California. So 650 acres, I believe it's near the LA port, near the docks. This refinery, it doesn't say this in the article, but the refinery is over 100 years old. So call it 1925. They've been refining oil on this 650 acres. How contaminated do you think that land is? What are there in California? What are their other real estate use is going to be? It's not going to be very good, I can tell you that. The contamination there is just going to be horrendous. There's about 600 employees, 300 contractors that operate the LA area refinery. Phillips said it's going to work with those, it's going to try to help those workers transition So the closure comes after California Governor Gavin Newsom on Monday signed a bill aimed at combating rising gas prices, as well as after the oil refiner received pressure from an activist investor to focus on operations and limited costs. So there's some more. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Some more regulatory nonsense coming down from Governor Newsom in California, which just basically makes the refinery business not practical at all. And so Phillips has pulled the plug on their least productive asset, which is this 100-year-old plant that I'm certain is contaminating real estate, but I'm just guessing on that. I do not know that for a fact, and it is not in the Wall Street Journal article. The activist investor is trying to get them to focus on operations and limit costs. One of the reasons I perked up when I saw the name Phillips in the Wall Street Journal is years and years and years ago, maybe decades ago, it might have been sort of late 90s, let's say somewhere in there. I was financing the development of a golf course in a strange little city that I'm sure is amazing now. I actually quite liked it there, called Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And as I recall at the time, the city was about 40,000 people. Had the best barbecue restaurant I had ever been to, with the name, it was called Dinks, Dinks. And I bought a t-shirt that said something dirty about the restaurant on it, Dinks. Anyways, in Bartlesville was the home of Phillips. There was some sort of story that Bartlesville had the highest paid, was the wealthiest town in all of the U.S. because the only industry there was Phillips, which paid a fortune to its employees, and it wasn't the laborers, it was the executive team and the PhDs and the labs and this sort of stuff that are all making lots of money on a salary, and then there was 2 or 3 or more colleges, and so the jobs there were professors, which were all so basically the whole town was getting a decent paycheck when I was there. But the hotel that you stayed in, the only real hotel downtown where I needed to be in Bartlesville was the Phillips Hotel, which, as I recall, was on Phillips Road. And and when you went to the restaurant in this old hotel down in the basement in the dark, you had a very nice meal, but it was like a Phillips steak. I might be exaggerating on that, but for sure, when you order a bottle of wine, the only wine available was Phillips branded wine. Everything was Phillips in this town. Everything was Phillips. And so it seems to me their history has been that they are a company that spent a lot of money on peripheral things that perhaps were non-core. This is a long time ago and a small little anecdote, but it just made me laugh because it has a personal connection for me. So the bill that Newsom signed into law gives the state regulatory agency, the California Energy Commission, the authority to set inventory levels for refiners, so they can set the inventory level in addition to authorizing the regulator to approve scheduled maintenance times. And so I think the genesis of this bill, the point of this bill, is to smooth out and manage energy costs in California, as opposed to letting the market dictate this. And so the government's jumping in, and it's going to toy with inventory levels. They can regulate that. They can regulate operating periods and down periods for maintenance. And of course, the oil refiners and trade groups opposed the bill. And after the bill was approved, Andy Waltz, Chevron president of downstream, midstream, and chemicals, told Sacramento, California's some TV station that the oil company may stop investing in the state at all. Several labor groups representing refinery workers who also issued a letter in opposition to the bill, claiming the proposal dismisses the, quote, I like this, the workforce with direct knowledge and insight into refinery operations and maintenance, end quote, in favor of, quote, lawyers and market economists who lack refinery experience, end quote. Absolutely true. A smart letter and opposition from labor. So that's what's going on with Phillips in California and the continued regulatory environment that is hostile to business, it appears, in California. How does anyone do business in California anymore? It's really amazing to me. It's so out of control with regulation. intended to drive a political agenda. Business after business is leaving the state. Did you see that Musk's SpaceX is now suing California because the regulator for whatever is regulating his launches, rocket launches out of California, won't let him launch a rocket anymore. And it's right in the regulatory, I don't know if it's in the ruling or the discussion that led to the ruling, because I think that becomes public information, rightly or wrongly. But it was right in there that it was entirely political, that they think Musk has too much power and he's too rich, and they don't like his politics because he talks against democratic policies. Not democratic as in small d, but big D Democrat policies. And so purely political, and they admit it. And so I don't know how you survive in California, but I will say this. I don't think this is anything new in California. Being being older and having been around a while, I can talk to that. One of my first gigs as a young professional in restructuring and corporate finance was a Canadian bankrupt real estate company called Bramalea. Those of you listening to the live stream from the Toronto Bay Street area will remember that. If you're old enough, back in Bramalea, I think my real first file ever was Algoma Steel, and after that I moved to Bramalea. And specifically, so you had a bank like billions of dollars in the late 80s, early, that would have been what, 90, 91, 92, somewhere in there. Billions of dollars was a lot of money back then. A Canadian real estate company going through a restructuring. And one of their wholly owned subsidiaries was a California-based residential real estate developer called Markborough Properties. I don't know if they still exist. At the time, they were the second largest real estate developer in the state of California. And they were knocking it out of the park, making a bunch of money, owned by bankrupt Canadian real estate company. And I was the sole person as a kid, like in my young 20s as a professional, sent down to keep an eye on these American real estate developers in California who were making tons of money. Can you imagine how much they liked me? They didn't like me at all. And so I was in one of my early meetings, and they were showing the projects, and they had, the land on screen, the plot that they were trying to develop, and there was a big chunk of it blocked off. Now we're not going to do, so we're going to develop housing over here, or subdivisions, but we're not going to develop. Well, why can't we develop in that particular area? Well, it was for environmental and animal protection reasons. And I was like, oh, well, explain that to me. And so in California has always been heavy in regulation and protectionist. And there's a lizard on this piece of land, and it's on the endangered species. I said, oh, okay, so I guess we can't develop over there because it could disturb their habitat. The only problem was the lizard, there was another lizard that was around that, I'm sure it was a lizard, doesn't matter. Another lizard around that was a pest. There were so many of them. They're just so abundant everywhere. And the only difference between the lizard, the only way you could tell the difference between the lizard that was endangered and the lizard where there was way too many of them, is to dissect the lizards so you could look at their skull, because there was a slight variation on that. So so you had to literally dissect the lizard to tell whether you've got the endangered one or the one that's not endangered. And because of that, they couldn't develop their real estate. Anyway, so I'm not convinced what's going on in California is new. I think it's always been like this, but it's got to be a hard place to do business. And the point of the matter here is politics matter in business. This is why we cover politics on this show as it relates to business, to your business, to medium and small businesses. Wall Street Journal also reports new U.S. merger rules will weigh heavily on private equity. U.S. antitrust regulators have dialed back plans to collect a mass of data from companies planning mergers, but and then they softened the tough requirements. But even the requirements that they're going forward with, the softened requirements, are going to be a serious issue. The Federal Trade Commission. Sorry, I've got my laptop here now, thinks I'm talking to Siri, but I'm not talking to Siri. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, voted unanimously to expand the amount of information collected from various financial institutions, and that would include private equity. Antitrust lawyers call it the biggest change to the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act, whatever, process in decades, and one that will saddle private equity with more paperwork, fees, and headaches, but might not, the industry hopes, result in blocked deals. Business lobbyists may sue to block the changes, but so far they haven't tipped their hand. FTC, an agency tasked with enforcing fair business practices, said the new rules will help it detect potentially anti-competitive deals and will streamline the review process. The new reporting system marks a generational upgrade that will sharpen the antitrust agencies' investigations and allow us to more effectively protect against mergers that may substantially lessen competition to tend to create a monopoly. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, I work with medium and small businesses. That's what this show is often about, or my content is often about. So I work with medium and small businesses. This is about big antitrust, non-competitive monopoly. This is big, big deals. No, don't you think that? Under Khan, who led the agency since 2021, the FTC has reversed its longstanding neglect of private equity. In other words, they haven't regulated private equity and turned its attention to how buyouts can affect markets. Along with new merger rules, Khan has launched an investigation into private equity profiteering in healthcare. She has sued a buyout firm for allegedly seeking to monopolize the Texas anesthesiology market. The new merger rules are consistent with the enforcement philosophy and anti-private equity inclination of the current FTC and Justice Department. So this is all part of the Biden-Harris administration. He added that the rules will weigh more heavily on private equity firms than other types of buyers because the former typically have larger networks and affiliates and investors to report. Buyout firms will now need to report deal structures. So you'll have to report your actual deal structures and any overlapping business relationships between entities to shed light on the complex and often opaque relationships that go on within private equity funds. The firms will also need to tell the FTC about any related deals they took part of in the 5 years. This is the heart of the matter here. Part of the antitrust authority's recent focus on private equity roll-ups. Do you know what a roll-up is? A roll-up is when you buy one company and you call that your platform. Let's say you're in the printing business or the anesthesiology business, as the article earlier referred to. And then you think, hey, if I buy another anesthesiology, I should say printing, it's easier to say. If I buy another printing company and merge it together, I now have a larger printing company and I can get rid of redundant overheads in the executive level. I can spread my CapEx, my capital expenditure budget, new technologies over a larger firm. And then, I'm going to go buy a third one and I'm going to merge that in and a fourth and a fifth. And you start rolling up what would otherwise be a fragmented industry and a bunch of smaller companies. And you create this much, much larger company that, eventually could dominate the industry and become a monopoly or close to a monopoly and anti-competitive. And if you have all the money in the world, which many private equity funds do, or the industry does in general, then that's what happens. And that's what they're trying to regulate. Right now, the FTC can only look at deals over $120 million in transaction value. So they can look at deals $120 million in transaction value, which when you think about it, isn't really that much. If they're paying, I don't know, that's got to be like a $15 million EBITDA company, which in the US is kind of mid-market to smallish, right? And if you put a multiple on that, that becomes $120 million transaction value that the FTC can look at. Well, now they can go way down the line, and it's not looking at transaction value, it's looking at relationships and whether there's a roll-up here. And a roll-up is precisely how many of the private equity companies make their big bump. Right? They create value for their unit holders by, if they buy a company, they want to grow the operations, right? They want to increase EBITDA if that's their valuation metric. as a standalone. They want to reduce the leverage, so they took debt to buy that company, and then they use internal cash flows to pay that down, which increases the equity value. But the big one is to turn a smaller business into a much, much larger business by adding onto those platforms, by doing a roll up, as I described. And if that's being heavily regulated, well, that's going to be a problem. The FTC estimates the changes will add 68 hours to the length of time it takes to prepare an M&A paperwork. So for every deal you do, you have to spend another 68 hours of professional time. And if that's what they're saying, it's going to be much worse than that. Attorneys say the extra burden will be substantial. Yeah, no shit. 68 hours per deal. That's a lot. So look at, you may think this is too large and out of touch for you and your business, but you are wrong. Hey, Marcin, thanks for joining us on YouTube. Okay, there's a guy on Instagram. There's a guy on Instagram right now. I've pitched his book to you before, and I keep trying to get to his content, but I keep bumping it because he's got a great thing going on LinkedIn. I'm going to do it tomorrow. I promise. He teaches you and provides content how to raise money in the particular one that struck with me from high net worth individuals. So I am going to be getting to that tomorrow, and every day I promise him I'm going to get to it, and I bump it, but tomorrow is the day. So you think that this roll-up regulation and monitoring is going to not impact your medium or smallish business, but you're wrong. You're wrong because PE, the whole world of private equity, is an ecosystem, right? So in the private equity world itself, the smaller private equity funds buy the smaller businesses. They do some roll-ups. What is their exit? Often their exit is to a larger PE fund, and they do the same thing. And then they sell. That means they sell to a even larger PE fund. And so it kind of keeps going up, and then eventually it goes private or sells to a strategic or what have you, or just floats around the PE ecosystem forever. And so that's the way that business works. And so if you're attacking the top or the middle or even the lower end of that PE ecosystem, it's going to trickle down. And also think about the VC market, the venture capital market. What are they doing? They're buying into new startups or relatively newish tech high growth companies. What is the exit of a VC fund? Well, an exit, because they have to get their money back, 7 years, 10 years, whatever the number is, time frame is, they have to get their money back. How do they do that? Well, they either take that company public or they sell it to a PE fund. And if the PE fund is being regulated, if the expenses have gone up, what is that going to do? It's going to impact deal flow. It's going to impact access to company. Even in the venture capital world, it's going to impact cash availability to capital in the angel investor world, because this whole thing is going to trickle down 100% guaranteed, and it's going to impact M&A valuations. Now, I don't want to make this particular piece of legislation or regulation that dramatic, right? We have to see how it shakes out and how the industry finds workarounds. Capitalism works pretty well so they'll restructure if they have to. They'll find workarounds to this. But conceptually, if you're attacking rollouts, which is the political bet behind this regulation, if you're attacking roll-ups and adding costs 68 hours to every single deal, that will guaranteed reduce valuations and limit your access to capital. Politics matter. Where am I on time here? 5 minutes left. I'm going to wrap this up a little early. I do want to mention that the Pathway to Profit Academy is available. I'm not going to pitch it to you today. If you're a longtime listener, you know I try not to hit you over the head every single day. But just to remind you, there is a discount code in the notes. It's Mornings with Scott, all one word, no capital letters, and that will give you 50% off the entire course. This week only. There's 2 modules already released and 6 more to come. They come one a month. And so on the 15th, we've been doing it. And so the cash flow model was released 2 days ago. All right, that's it. I'm off to work. Where are we here? Do I have any comments I need to respond to? Nope. I'm off to work, and I will see you tomorrow, Friday, 8:30 a.m. Mountain, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. See you then.